Have you ever wondered about that unsung hero that catches the football for kicks? Well, the kicking holders are special today, and we have Timothy B. Brown here to tell us all about the history of putting from mounds of dirt to catching snaps and everything in between. Tim's up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another evening of Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com sharing one of his many tidbits with us. Tonight, we have a really special one for you. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, thank you, Darren. Look forward to chatting as always. And I would ask the listeners to hold on because it's going to get better as we go along. So far, it's not very good.
Yeah, I was going to say
we don't. A lot better.
We don't have to rise very far to reach that at this beginning. But Tim is alluding to one of his recent tidbits called holders and other put downs that he had on footballarchaeology.com. Tim, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one where, like most of my stuff, it's just something I kind of come across as I'm doing research on one thing. And so, I over the, starting just before Christmas, I started a series on Michigan's road trip east in 1883. So they played 4 games there. And so I, kind of did a story on each of them. But their last game was against the Stevens Institute. And in writing that portion of it up, I was reading, kind of reports from the front, so the reports from the Michigan folks in, their publications about what happened during that game or during those games. And one of the things that had been raised was that in 1883, the internet or the Intercollegiate Football Association made some rule changes in early October that the people on the East Coast knew about, but Michigan did not, was not aware of. And so they got out there and, there had been there's a controversy about the holder on a kickoff or otherwise, but, generally holders. And so as they were describing this process, the thing was, it was supposed to be that the holder they were considered the holder offside if any part of his body was in front of the ball. Right now, we allow an exception nowadays, for the holder for that. But anyways, so and they described the term holder didn't exist at the time, so they call this person the putter down, and okay, I mean, what else are you going to call him, right?
I call that an ex-wife.
Yeah.
I'll put her down.
So anyways, this guy, so he calls him the putter down, and I did some searching, never found anybody else who called him the putter down. So that would have been a Michigan only thing. But actually in the rule book, in at least, for sure, a good part of the 80s and into the 90s, the person who held the ball for placement kicks and kickoffs was called the placer. So that in the rule book, they called the person the placer. And then in 1898, they finally started calling them the holder. But so, that kind of terminology change stuff to me is just fascinating. But one of the, this whole thing's, kind of this whole story started because a reader had asked, was like, hey, I've come across some pictures of people kicking off and they got a person holding the ball. So why would they have somebody hold the ball? And that was because football for a long time had a rule that said you can't have artificial tees. And so if you needed a tee, what you did is you gathered up, loose sod, dirt, whatever was around the field, and you made a little mound and you kicked off the mound. And so, number one, that tells you kind of the condition of the fields at the time, right? I mean, kind of rough shape. Um,
Did they have the you could take the back of your heel and just like kick go
yeah,
backwards and dig
yeah. So
that way?
you could
Yeah.
do the divot thing. You could have somebody hold it for you, or you created a tee. And actually, originally that's what golf did too. They created little mounds on the in the starter box, to tee off of. Um, but then what people were, it was the language said it couldn't be artificial tees. So what guys were doing is they'd make clay tees and bake them. And so then it was clay, it wasn't artificial. So then they tee off of these baked clay tees. So then in 22, the NCAA said, no, no more tees. So then you couldn't use tees at all until I want to say it was, maybe sometime after World War II. But so if you want, when you were kicking off, somebody had to hold the ball. They'd hold it, on the ground, and that was the only way that you could kick off. I guess you could still do the divot thing. Um, and then obviously at the time they were like this picture shows, they were still drop kicking a lot, and there were no tees, for field goal attempts, extra point attempts, etc. So I mean, it's just one of those things where you know, it's a nitpicky little thing, but you can't imagine calling that person a putter down as opposed to, or a placer instead of a holder. I mean, we know it's a holder, right? It's been that way since 1898. So, and then just kind of the sequence of not being allowed to use any kind of artificial tee, it's just one of those things you just can't imagine why they did that, but they did, you know.
Yeah, I know like from when I was playing like in the 70s and 80s, they had those orange tees that had
Yeah,
like the four like spikes coming off them. I'm always
yeah,
sitting there thinking, God, if somebody gets tackled on that, you're gonna get impaled on this thing. It'll
yeah.
kill you. I don't know how they ever let those be legal, but they were. Now, when the holders did that, I know there's like images of like for field goal placement, the holder is like on his stomach holding. Is that how they did the kickoffs as well?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they did that a lot of times. So uh, so kickoff was different because um, that was a free kick, right? Meaning the defense or the receiving team can't rush until you kick the ball, or they can't, I mean, they're not going to rush you, right? On So pre 1922, 21, 22, they changed the extra point process. And so, and until then, an extra point was a free kick. So the the defending team had to be behind the goal line, and the kicking team, depending on whether they punted out or where they where they were able to place the ball, um, they executed a free kick. And
Mm,
so the holder would lie on his stomach, and he'd put the ball, between his hands, right? With one hand under the ball, one hand to top the ball. And that because as soon as the ball touched the ground, the defense could rush the kicker, right?
okay.
So they'd lie on the ground, hold like that, and then he'd pull the lower hand out, and then the kicker would kick the ball, right? So that's why they did that. And they basically continued doing that in most cases um, until until it was no longer a free kick. And then, then it was you can run, you can pass, you can kick, and you still get 1 point, no matter what. Um, and by then they started treating the extra point attempt like a placement field goal. So rather than a drop kick, you'd snap to a guy who would then hold the ball, similar to what we do now, right? Initially, that guy would stand up. He'd be like squatting, waiting for the snap, and then place it down. And then eventually I figured it was, and partly maybe they just had better snappers. Because they didn't have the spiral snap, for until like 1912 or something like that. And so anyways, they uh, eventually they started holding much like we do today.
Okay. Yeah, if only in the Peanuts cartoons, if Lucy would have been able to use that method, she could have pulled it away
Yeah,
even faster from Charlie Brown. Hands on each point of the ball. But yeah, that's too bad that she didn't do that. But
yeah,
I was observing your picture behind you, okay? And it
yeah,
looks like it's a pretty thrilling play, drop kick. The guys are all over each other
yep,
going on. But I noticed up in the crowd, there's like four people in the stands in the field of play. There's more people in their cars, it looks like, in the background, and there's a lot more people down beyond the end line. There must be something, free hot dogs or something at the concession stand. I don't know.
yeah. I grabbed this, and there's even hurdles sitting on the track right here too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I grabbed this image, you know, probably a year ago, and just stuck it in my Zoom uh, selections, and so I don't even know what school that is. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't have an explanation for you, but um,
I'm gonna go with the free hot dogs at the concession stand. That's what I'm gonna.
yeah, it's probably as good an
Yeah,
explanation as any.
right. But Tim, this is another piece of where you've taken a tidbit and talked about an aspect of football that we don't really talk mainstream about very often. And you do this quite often in your tidbits. Maybe you could share with the listeners where they can partake in some of your tidbits.
Yep, footballarchaeology.com. It's a Substack, site, newsletter, blog, whatever you want to call it. So either go there, subscribe, go there whenever you want to, or you can follow me on Blue Sky under the Football Archaeology name. And every time that I post something new, I post it on there. If you subscribe, you would get an email in your inbox every time that I publish something new.
All right, Tim. Well, we really appreciate you coming on here each and every Tuesday, and we'd love to talk to you again next Tuesday.
Very good. We'll see you then.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.